Open up a new Colab notebook, and let's call this one Matrices. You know what these are really? They're list of lists, okay? So you can have anything inside of a list, and you can certainly have lists inside of a list. So let's take a look at what that might look like. Okay, so I'm going to define this as a matrix, and I've got a list here. But now inside this list, maybe I want like, say, 3 numbers. Like maybe 1, 0, 0, the first element of the list. Okay, note now I want to comma after that because my second element of the list will also be a list. Okay, you can totally do this. Now I want to say 0, 1, 0. Now I think if, you want to be consistent, I think, for readability. If I use spaces and spacing in between the commas, good to keep that up. And finally, I'll do one more element of the list. And let's call this one 0, 0, 1. Okay, so I now have a list of lists. I'm defining this as a matrix. Press Shift Enter to store it. Okay, and it's kind of interesting. So we're going to try to look at this in some different ways. So first of all, what's the first element of this list? Okay, you can get it using the 0th index. Think about it for a moment before we reveal it with code. Like, what do you think it is? What's the first element of the list matrix? Okay, get it in your mind, then press Shift Enter to run the code. And you can see it's sort of interesting. It's not just the number 1, because the first element is actually a list, right? And so if you want the first element of the first element in the list, you need to use double indexing here. And because that is defined as what you see above a list, you can in fact simply continue and put another 0. If we press Shift Enter, now you do get that first element of 1. So that's kind of cool, I think, where you're using like double indices. Now, for those of you who know some linear algebra, this is not an ordinary matrix. This is a special matrix. It is actually the identity. Okay. Now, if you print it out, okay, let's see what it looks like. So I print out the matrix. It just shows it exactly as I have it up here. But if I write it like this with pressing return, and maybe I'll even try to line it up a little bit for you. So this is actually what the matrix would look like in math. It's all zeros except for 1 on the diagonals. Okay. So it doesn't have sort of the nice visual representation that we want, but what you have here are that the first entries are rows and sort of the second entries then are columns, if you like. So what we can do is, for instance, let's show the second row of the matrix. Okay, second row of matrix. Well, how would you do that? Well, we put in matrix, and if it's just row, well, 0 gives us the first row, and 1 gives us the second row. And so let's go ahead and check it, press Shift Enter, and you can see that is in fact the second row. Now, getting a column here would be a little trickier. Let's just look at an element. And so like, how can I show the, say, like the, let's pick an element here, maybe this one. So I've got third row, second column. Okay, so show the third row, second column of matrix, right? Okay, well, I've got my matrix, and for the third row with indexing, that's 0, 1, 2. Now if I have my second column starting with 0, that would be 0, 1. And so I'm expecting to get that 0, and I press Shift Enter, and I do in fact get that 0. And so it's just kind of a cool way that you can access parts of a matrix. I mean, you could slice, right? You could, for instance, show last 2 rows. And so matrix, well, how would I do that? Well, if I start at the, not the negative first, but the negative second, and I take everything after, okay, that should work. And you can see it does, in fact, show you the last 2 rows. Okay. The reason why the columns are sort of trickier is because, I mean, you can do it. Let's do it. Let's look at it like, how would we say show the last column? The problem is you can't get it directly because you've got to first, like, index it by the rows. And so what you can do is actually use kind of a for loop here. And so we don't know yet what's in the column. It's empty. because we call it last column. Now, what do we do here? Okay, we're going to loop through the rows. So for I in, well, what are we going into here? Well, depends on how you look at it, okay? You can go straight into the matrix, right? Right, let me just pull it up here. Right here we have our matrix. And so if you're in the matrix, right, then you've got these three elements, you know? Okay, so for I in, I mean, I like to use the counting myself because, you know, if I know there's three, then I can just set up a range of three, okay? Right, that's gonna be 0, 1, 2. And what do I do with that? Well, what I actually wanna do is I wanna access, okay, its matrix. Each case, right, that's the row that I'm gonna get. But in all of those cases, okay, so for instance, let's just go through this first. This is gonna give me first the 0th row, then the first row, and the second row. But what I want is not the whole row, I want the last element in that row, which I know to be indexed here by 2. And so this does assume that we know it, right? We know the numbers, and so that's gonna give me the 3 elements of the column, but I wanna add that to, you know, the column, okay? And let's just, yeah, I'll keep the last column. So we'll do last call dot append because we don't have anything in there. So this one's a little more complicated. Perhaps there's a better way. You know, usually there are a lot of ways to code things. And the idea here is now we can check and hopefully we have the last column as expected. So let's go ahead and like run this code. You can see we do get the 0, 0, 1, which we can confirm as above. That is in fact the last column here. Okay, and we've converted it into its own list. So it can be a little tricky like dealing with matrices in case you want to know, like, look, this is a list of a list. It's not like it's a matrix. To turn it into a mathematical matrix where you can work with other matrices, you would simply convert it into a NumPy array, but the style of storing the data here would actually be the same where you're using like rows and columns as such.